You know what season's fun? Bowl season's fun. Sending a whole bunch of teams to the southern part of the United States, or Boise, or New York City, or Detroit, to spend their Christmas break somewhere away from home playing a fun game for funky hardware after the hard work of the season comes to an end is one of college football's best aspects. Bowl games can be a pivotal moment in program's history as well, even if they don't really mean much of anything. I mean, honestly, how many of you care about the 1993 Weiser-Lock Copper Bowl? If you said you do, the only reason is because you're a K-State fan. That's it. But bowl games have largely been played within the borders of the United States. This makes sense, because NCAA college football is largely played within the borders of the United States. But that isn't always the case. Regular season games have taken place outside the borders of the country before, like the famous Ireland Championship won by Northwestern last season, or Japan's Mirage Bowl or Coca-Cola Classic. But despite international games having a draw for certain colleges and their crowds, going international for the holidays doesn't seem to have had a similar pull. Today, I'm going to look at some of the few postseason play college football games that have taken place outside the borders of the United States. So load up those commercial airlines, make sure your players have passports, especially those of them who haven't left the country yet, which is likely all of them, and join me as I take a look at some of the goofiest postseason games in college football history that just so happen to take place outside the American border. The first of these games that many of you probably know about is the Bacardi Bowl, played in Havana, Cuba, a handful of times between 1907 and 1946. The first of these games, a Christmas Day blowout of LSU over the University of Havana, 56-0, isn't much to write home about, but the mere fact of its existence certainly was. Not only was this the first ever bowl game to be played outside the borders of the United States, it was also LSU's first ever bowl appearance. After a couple years off, the game returned to New Year's Day of 1910, with an aptly named Cuban athletic club claiming victory over Tulane 11-0. Scoreless droughts became a theme in 1912, where the game was played twice that year, once for the 1911 athletic season on New Year's Day and once for the 1912 athletic season on Christmas Day. But it's this 1912 edition of the game that is one of the more interesting stories in college football history surrounding it. Florida, having finished 5-2-1 in the SIAA, had entered a two-game agreement to play two Cuban teams for that bowl week. Their first game was on Christmas Day against Vedado Tennis Club, a relatively drab 28-0 victory without much fanfare. But when they suited up to play another squad 3 days later, they faced controversy. After one quarter of play against the Cuban Athletic Club, Gator head coach George Pyle and his players got upset that the rules being utilized for the game were old, actively hurting the play style for Florida. After some in-game investigation, Coach Pyle discovered that the lead referee for the game had recently been the head coach for the Cuban Athletic Club. In protest, Pyle gathered up his Gator players and left the game. Leaving an exhibition that spectators had paid to see before its completion was considered illegal in Cuba, and Pyle was arrested by Cuban authorities. After bail was posted and Pyle was released, the group decided to leave Cuba instead of finishing the game, stowing away on a steamship bound for Tampa. When it was discovered that the Gators had, in essence, defected from Cuba, Cuban authorities proclaimed that Coach Pyle was a fugitive from justice. Over a bowl game! It would take 9 years for the game to continue, with Ole Miss becoming the latest victim of the Cuban Athletic Club. 15 years later came yet another interesting game, the first and only Bicardi Bowl played between two American teams, Auburn and Villanova, thus being an NCAA-sanctioned bowl and the only Bicardi Bowl to have ended in a tie. Also Auburn's first recorded bowl game, this game almost didn't happen because of the local government in Cuba. The country had just seen dictator Fulgencio Batista assume power, setting the stage for Fidel Castro to take over years down the line. Due to Batista's recency, his picture was not displayed in the game's handout program, according to former Auburn player Frank Ham, which infuriated him so much the game was almost canceled. Frantically, new programs were printed before kickoff with his likeness, allowing the game to be played. The last Bacardi Bowl would be played in 1946, in which Mississippi Southern put 55 unanswered points on the University of Havana. 50 years after the final Bacardi Bowl in 1996, interest had begun to rise again in another international bowl game, this time far away from the Northern Hemisphere, in New Zealand. I'm sure some of you have seen the videos of the traditional Maui dance, the Haka, so I'm not going to spend any time describing that here. All you need to know is that, as the Bull's namesake, it would likely have had some sort of presence at the game itself. Spearheaded by Kiwi and former NFL linebacker Ricky Ellison, the Haka Bowl itself would have taken place at Auckland's Eden Park, a rugby stadium that could seat approximately 50,000 college football fans and would have been slotted for the 6 days after Christmas and before New Year's, with the 1996 date being planned for December 27th, which would have been December 26th in the United States. It would have featured third-place teams from the two westernmost conferences in NCAA Division 1A, the Pac-10 and the Western Athletic Conference, likely with a preference for the Hawaii Rainbow Warriors. Those teams were set to be the 7-5 Stanford Cardinal and the 8-3 San Diego State Aztecs. The payout was set to be high for a normal bowl game due to international travel costs associated with moving two American college football teams to New Zealand for a week. It's this payout that doomed the game. According to the Orange County Register, Haka Bowl officials couldn't find the funds to guarantee the payout in time for the game to be confirmed by the NCAA, so the license for the game was revoked. Stanford instead played in the Sun Bowl, where they defeated Michigan State, but due to the 16-team WAC only having 3 bowl tie-ins, of which the Haka was one, only 2 WAC teams got to go bowling. San Diego State, despite placing 3rd in a Division I conference, did not play in a bowl game. Despite the NCAA wanting the bowl committees to seek recertification for the 1997 season, the bowl game was shelved. It took 10 years for another bowl game to feel confident enough to go international. This time, teams would be heading north of the border, to Toronto, Canada, for the International Bowl, held in the home of the Blue Jays, the Rogers Centre. It had been in development for some time. Around the beginning of the millennium, Toronto was bleeding millions of dollars in tourism revenue due to the SARS outbreak of 2003, according to Wikipedia. Canada had pushed for a bowl game then, but was denied as the NCAA favored the Poinsettia Bowl instead. Reactivating their campaign, the International Bowl was greenlit by the NCAA for the 2006 bowl slate, pitting a team from the MAC against a team from the Big East. Unfortunately for the MAC, they failed to bring home a single International Bowl trophy, as each of the 4 games were won by Big East teams. Even the 2009 Buffalo Bulls in their first ever bowl game failed to win. The reason this was their first ever bowl game? They turned down an invitation to the 1958 Tangerine Bowl against Florida State because the bowl wouldn't allow black players to play. After initially being set up for 4 games, the Big East allowed their contract with the bowl itself to run out after the January 2010 game. Given the Big East tie-ins with the Pinstripe Bowl, any chances of the MAC finding a new dance partner for the bowl died. They inherited a tie-in to the Humanitarian Bowl instead, and the International Bowl was officially dead. We finally had another International Bowl suit up for the bowl slate in 2014, when the Bahamas Bowl officially came to fruition as just the 3rd ever International Bowl game officially recognized by the NCAA. Set up as a duel between the MAC and Conference USA and Nassau's Thomas Robinson Stadium, the Bahamas Bowl has earned a reputation as one of the more entertaining bowls in the bowl lineup. Aside from the fact that in 2014 the game was sponsored by Popeye's Chicken, and there were no Popeye's Chicken restaurants in the entirety of the Bahamas. It might as well have been the Whataburger Bowl in Germany. Created jointly by the MAC and the Conference USA, the game was set up to add another bowl for both conferences, as other bowls were shifting hands in the college football landscape. According to SB Nation writer Roger Sermon, the game was inspired by CUSA Commissioner Britton Banowski's recent trip to the college basketball tournament, the Battle for Atlantis, held in the Bahamas. Its unique location would have provided a sense of intrigue for the game that might have earned the conferences more dollars than they would have gotten elsewhere, they figured. The tourism department for the Bahamas agreed. But there's trouble in paradise. If the conferences got their way, the game would have taken place on December 24th, so that channel-hopping TV viewership wouldn't be swayed by the NBA or college hoops. The problem with that is that the Bahamian holiday of Junkanoo, kicking off with a festive parade, would take place after midnight on the 26th. The game and the festival would be vying for the same tourists in theory. The suits prevailed and the game took place on Christmas Eve. As for the sponsor, Popeyes had been wanting to get involved in the bowl sphere for some time. They jumped at the opportunity. And so, the first ever Bahamas Bowl would feature Western Kentucky from Conference USA and Central Michigan from the MAC, but the schools still faced logistic issues. Western Kentucky had hardly anyone with a passport. They needed help from a representative of Kentucky to speed up the process once they found out they were playing in the game. Bringing practice gear was an issue. Water and Gatorade arrived late. The game had to import Popeye's Chicken to an island full of KFC stands. It was a nightmare. My only knowledge of this game stems from one of the most entertaining Reddit threads I have ever had the pleasure of reading. Among the highlights, security guards having no idea what they're guarding, or if they're even guarding anything at all. Sometimes they're just not guarding anything. They also give great high fives. Drunk fans everywhere, including the field of play. Only one scoreboard worked. It didn't show the game clock, just ESPN's live feed from the game. The music guy was so bad at his job, he may have been fired mid-game. Reddit, you guys may hate me, but you're some funny dudes sometimes. And while all of this was happening off the field, some crazy stuff was happening on the field. I can't show you the ending of the game due to copyright concerns with ESPN, but man, if you get the chance to watch the ending of the 2014 game, do yourself a favor and do it. It's the stuff of college football lore. Anyway, after holding off an incredible comeback attempt by Central Michigan, Western Kentucky managed to win the 2014 version of the game, 49-28. 2020 saw the game get canceled due to international travel concerns, and after a couple of seasons back, the game was moved to Charlotte, North Carolina for the 2023 season due to construction at Robinson Stadium, with the one-off version of the bowl being called the famous Toastery Bowl. Man, long live weird bowl games.